Welcome to the debate. Think about the last time you created a new social media profile or, even just updating your bio.
Oh, the absolute paralysis of typing student and deleting it immediately.
Right. You type aspiring artist, you stare at it, you delete it, you try adding a joke, worry it sounds, I don't know, too try hard, and backspace again.
It's a universal experience at this point.
It really is. And in those small, deeply frustrating moments, you are actually wrestling with one of the most profound questions of human existence, which is, who am I really? So today, we are asking whether those digital profiles we spend so much time curating actually represent a genuine extension of our human identity, or, well, if they are merely a performance that distracts us from true self-discovery.
And we are focusing this conversation directly on the students listening right now. Because if you were a young adult, you're navigating your self-image in this hyper-connected world where your peers can observe and, frankly, comment on your life in real time.
Yeah, it is a uniquely modern pressure cooker.
Exactly. And it fundamentally changes how identity is formed.
To explore this, we are drawing from Zola's deeply moving manuscript, Before I Go. Zola wrote this text as a sort of a transfer of wisdom to the next generation. It's a raw, deliberate guide on identity, mentorship, and honestly, survival.
It's an incredible text.
It really is. And looking closely at Zola's work, my stance today is that social media profiles function as an inherent trap of curated performance that actively subverts the difficult, quiet work of genuine self-discovery that Zola champions.
Well, I read Zola's observations on identity and come to a very different conclusion. I argue that while digital platforms involve intense curation, they actually serve as a vital, modern stage for exploring what Zola calls the ideal self, and they vastly expand a student's ability to discover their true identity and connect with mentors outside of their immediate physical geography.
Okay, to really unpack this, we need to look at how Zola defines the core of human identity. He writes, quite beautifully I think, that identity is who you are when nobody is watching.
Right, the bedrock.
Exactly. It is the bedrock you reach for when the world falls apart. And when I think about a student's developing brain, that definition is the absolute antithesis of social media.
Because the internet is always watching?
Always. The digital world is entirely predicated on who you are when everyone is watching. Zola points out this danger when he notes that we constantly measure our ordinary Tuesday against someone else's best Saturday.
The classic comparison trap.
Right. But it is not just casual comparison, For a young student whose self-concept is still highly malleable, this creates an unwinnable psychological game.
Yeah, I can see the danger there.
Right. Because instead of figuring out what genuinely feels true to them, their brain is being rewired by a feedback loop of approval. They start reshaping their personality around what gets digital applause, losing the safety of being unobserved, which is precisely where true growth happens.
I completely understand the apprehension there, particularly regarding the developing brain's sensitivity to peer approval.
But let's look at how Zola actually describes the mechanics of building an identity.
Okay.
He leans heavily on the poet Alfred Tennyson, quoting the famous line, "I am a part of all that I have met. Identity isn't forged in a sensory deprivation chamber."
Well, no, of course not.
Right. It is the cumulative sum of everything that has profoundly touched you, challenged you, or inspired you.
But does scrolling through a feed count as meeting someone?
I think it expands the net of what you can meet. Digital networks exponentially increase the diversity of ideas, art, and people a student is exposed to. It enriches their foundational worldview. And look, Zola doesn't dismiss the act of curation as inherently fake. He introduces the psychological concept of the ideal self.
The future version you are striving toward.
Exactly. Curating a profile, choosing an aesthetic, highlighting certain interests, it isn't necessarily deceitful. I look at it as the modern equivalent of Zola's sculptor analogy.
Oh, the workspace.
Yeah, it is a deliberate, external workspace where a student can visualize, adjust, and refine the person they want to become.
I actually really like the sculptor analogy, but I think we have to look at the environment where Zola says the best sculpting happens.
Okay, where's that?
Well, for Zola, profound self-discovery didn't begin by casting a wide net of casual interactions or testing out aesthetics online. He is incredibly vulnerable in the manuscript about losing his brother Jude.
Yeah, that section is heartbreaking.
Truly, Jude was a man who possessed a deep, settled knowing of exactly who he was. He never had to perform. And when Zola lost him, the search for his own identity truly began, but it began in the profound, isolating silence of grief.
Right. He had to step away.
Entirely away from the noise of the world. He had to sit alone and ask, who am I really? You cannot crowdsource that answer on a feed. You need a space quiet enough to actually hear your own internal voice.
I hear that. And the loss of Jude is arguably the emotional anchor of the entire book. But if we map out Zola's broader life journey, his identity wasn't solely defined in the isolation of grief.
You're thinking of the travel sections?
Exactly. He also learned exactly who he was through radical, sometimes overwhelming exposure to the unfamiliar. Think about his intense cultural shock when moving from Kinshasa to Durban, South Africa.
Right, the handshake boundary?
Yes! He grew up in a very specific culture where a handshake was the ultimate boundary of respect. Then he arrives in Durban, and a woman greets him with a massive embrace, and he writes that his whole being shook.
Because it was such a profound violation of his norm.
Right, but that physical, visceral discomfort taught him more about his own boundaries and his capacity for love than isolation ever could.
Okay, but that was a physical collision with reality.
But the mechanism of exposure is the same. For a teenager living in a homogeneous small town today, the internet is Durban.
That's a bit of a stretch, isn't it?
I don't think so. It is Thailand, where Zola had to learn to bow at the speed and humility of a Thai local. It is a radical collision with new norms that forces a student to decide, do I resist this or do I grow from it?
I see the parallel you are drawing. I do. But I have to push back on the nature of that exposure. The physical reality of a hug in Durban carries an authenticity and a relational risk that a digital comment section simply does not possess.
Fair point.
And more importantly, let's look at the psychological cost of trying to sustain that global exposure all day, every day. Zola just provides a brilliant warning using the analogy of the actor.
Ah, the acting metaphor.
Yes. He observes that actors who spend years performing other people's words, crying other people's tears, and embodying other people's lives often ends up in a severe psychological crisis.
Because they cannot separate themselves from the role.
Exactly. His exact words are, you cannot live inside someone else's skin forever without losing track of your own. So look at what we ask students to do online. They are constantly maintaining a persona.
Curating the aesthetic, monitoring the metrics, yeah.
Right. Doesn't that constant maintenance force a young adult to be a full-time actor in their own life? Aren't we just accelerating them toward the exact identity crisis Zola warns us about?
I admit, the actor analogy is one of the most haunting parts of the manuscript. And I do struggle with it because an actor is reading a script written by someone else.
Whereas a student is writing their own script?
At least attempting to, yeah. But I think Zola provides the antidote to this crisis in the very same section. He writes, there is nothing wrong with a performance, but do not confuse the stage with the person standing on it.
But can a teenager reliably tell the difference? That's asking a lot of a developing brain.
That is exactly where digital literacy comes in. The problem you are describing isn't the existence of the profile itself. It is the lack of education around how to interact with it. If we teach a student to view their digital presence simply as a stage, a place for expression, rather than a pure reflection of their soul, it becomes a remarkably safe space to experiment.
So going back to the sculptor?
Exactly. A sculptor doesn't suffer an existential meltdown when they chip away a piece of clay and realize it doesn't look right. They just mold it differently. A student trying on a new subculture online, joining a niche community, and then abandoning it 3 weeks later isn't necessarily having an identity crisis.
They are just seeing what fits.
Right. They are just sculpting on a digital stage.
I love the idea of the digital world as a harmless experimentation stage, but I think that completely ignores the sheer force of the audience watching that stage.
How so?
Well, a physical stage implies a theater that eventually closes, right? The audience goes home. The digital stage never closes, and the audience has immense power to shape the performer. Zola specifically addresses how deeply we are shaped by our surroundings through what he calls the four forces.
Oh, right, the invisible pressures that mold us before we even realize it.
Yes, and it's vital we understand how they operate. He lists them as the reaction of others, comparison, social roles, and identification. In the physical world, these forces are subtle.
Like a frown or a smile.
Exactly. Or comparison is just looking at the kids sitting next to you in math class. Social roles are the boxes your friend group puts you in, like the smart one or the funny one. And identification is how heavily you fuse your sense of self with a specific group.
And you feel social media hyper-accelerates these forces.
It absolutely weaponizes them. It quantifies the reaction of others into highly visible, permanent metrics. It scales comparison so you aren't just benchmarking against a classmate.
You're benchmarking against millions of strangers.
Millions of heavily edited, heavily funded highlight reels. It locks you into social roles via algorithmic pigeonholing and pushes users into echo chambers. So if a student is trying to quietly figure out who they are, how can they possibly resist forces that are now optimized by supercomputers to hold their attention through psychological validation?
I cannot deny the intensity of those forces. The neurochemistry of a teenager receiving a notification is real, and the comparison trap is incredibly acute.
It's a casino where the house always wins.
But I think you are underestimating the agency of the student, which is the very thing Zola demands we cultivate. Zola talks about growing up wearing the glasses handed to him by his family, his religion, and his immediate physical community.
Yes, seeing his worth through their prescription.
Right, and he eventually had to shatter those glasses to see clearly. But students have always been pressured to conform. Long before the internet existed, physical communities handed young people ill-fitting glasses.
Sure, small towns have their own pressures.
Exactly. If you were a kid who didn't fit the mold of your conservative hometown or your specific religious upbringing, you historically had to just suffer in isolation. You wore glasses that blinded you because they were the only ones available.
So you were saying the digital world offers a different prescription.
I'm saying it's the first environment in human history that gives a young person the unprecedented power to bypass their immediate, restrictive physical culture. They can reach out into the digital ether and find a global community of people who share their specific interests, their neurodivergence, or their artistic passions.
Okay, bypassing your local culture to find a community is a powerful concept. I'll give you that. But I think we need to transition from finding a peer group to finding actual guidance.
You mean mentorship?
Yes, which is the second major pillar of Before I Go. Finding your peers is one thing, but finding someone to show you the way forward is entirely different.
Agreed.
And this is where I believe the digital landscape truly falters. In fact, I'd argue that modern connectivity actively hinders the kind of authentic mentorship Zola says is necessary for survival.
Wait, hinders it? I would argue the exact opposite. The internet has democratized access to expertise in ways a student 20 years ago couldn't have even fathomed.
Access to information and expertise, yes. But access to a mentor? Those are very different things. Zola is incredibly precise about what a mentor actually is. He explicitly warns his readers to avoid gurus and life coaches with a payment plan.
Right.
Yet, what does social media organically breed? It breeds influencers who sell high-level narratives, aesthetic perfection, and inspirational platitudes that Zola dismisses as mere noise.
But you are conflating grifters with the medium itself. Not everyone online is a life coach.
True. But the medium encourages the behavior of a guru rather than a mentor. Look at Zola's ultimate mentor, Colin Ogle, who he affectionately calls Daddy Cool.
Yeah, Colin is a great example.
What made Colin a great mentor wasn't that he broadcasted inspirational speeches to millions. It was his brutal clarity and his physical proximity. Colin would sit with Zola, listen to him complain, extract the actual root of the problem, and then look him in the eye and tell him an uncomfortable truth.
You definitely need that brutal honesty.
And you cannot replicate that depth in a comment section or a direct message. A mentor, as Zola experienced it, is someone who turns around to show you exactly where the potholes are on the road. An influencer just posts a drone video of themselves driving a sports car over a smoothly paved highway.
I love the distinction between the pothole and the sports car. That is very well put. And you are right that an influencer is not a mentor. But I think we need to look at Zola's central complaint regarding why people lack mentors in the first place.
The fear of asking?
Yes, he writes, the issue is rarely that they do not exist. The issue is that most people never ask. They assume they are bothering someone. They assume the answer will be no.
The fear of rejection is huge.
Exactly. It is a psychological friction problem. For a young person, walking up to an established professional and asking for guidance is terrifying. Digital connectivity significantly lowers the activation energy required to make that ask.
But if the ask is that easy, doesn't it cheapen the connection?
Not necessarily. Yes, the internet has false gurus, but it also contains genuine experts, artists, and professionals. And the screen provides a small buffer of safety that helps a student overcome the paralyzing fear of reaching out.
I just wonder if sending a low-stakes DM actually results in the kind of deep, committed relationship Zola had with Colin.
It absolutely can, because it solves the geographic lottery.
The geographic lottery?
Yeah, think about the historical limitation of mentorship. If you wanted a mentor, you had to hope and pray that a brilliant mind like Colin Ogle just happened to live in your physical zip code, worked in your specific field, and crossed paths with you organically at a coffee shop or university.
Right. That is pure luck.
Pure luck. In the digital age, a student interested in aerospace engineering or independent filmmaking doesn't have to rely on luck. They can directly message a professional on the other side of the planet. Zola beautifully describes a mentor as a light bearer, someone who has simply walked a little further down the road. Why should a student limit their search for light to the few people walking in their physical neighborhood?
Because the light bearers need to be close enough to actually see you in the dark. A true mentor, according to Zola, is an active listener. They remember what you told them 3 weeks ago. They follow up.
You can follow up online.
Yes, but they check in on you. Not because it benefits their personal brand, but because they are genuinely invested in your human growth. That level of investment requires a relational foundation that the ephemeral, fast-paced nature of the internet rarely supports.
You feel the internet is too transactional then?
Exactly. The digital world trains us to view people as utilities. I need advice. I send you a DM. You send a paragraph back, transaction complete. We part ways. That is not a mentorship. That is a search engine query directed at a human being. Zola tells us to find someone who will celebrate your growth because your growth genuinely matters to them. That requires shared life, shared stakes, and a sustained attention span that algorithms actively destroy.
I understand the skepticism about transactional relationships, but I honestly think you are underestimating how human beings adapt to technology.
How so?
Well, countless deep, meaningful relationships begin as a simple, transactional digital exchange. A cold email leads to a Zoom call. That Zoom call turns into a monthly check-in.
Okay.
Over 5 years, that relationship evolves into exactly the kind of robust, actively listening mentorship Zola describes. The platform is merely the introduction. The internet doesn't prevent active listening. It simply facilitates the initial handshake. Or, to return to Zola's cultural shock, it facilitates the hug that shakes your whole being, even if it has to happen across a screen first.
That is a very optimistic view of how these tools are used, and I don't deny that it happens in best-case scenarios. But we always have to come back to the risk.
Which is?
The risk is that the screen becomes the substitute for reality. When we look at the totality of what we've unpacked today, from the cognitive dissonance of playing an actor, to the overwhelming force of digital comparison, to the abundance of loud gurus drowning out quiet mentors, my position holds firm.
Even with the benefits of global community?
Yes, because for a student trying to find themselves, the digital landscape is primarily an environment that distracts them from the quiet, internal, often painful work of genuinely valuing themselves. When your brain is constantly reacting to the reactions of others, you literally cannot hear the silence where true self-discovery begins.
And my stance remains that if we equip students with digital literacy, this connectivity is an unparalleled tool for self-discovery. It is a vast, unprecedented stage for expanding a student's identity through radical exposure to diverse cultures and ideas. It entirely removes the geographic lottery of mentorship, giving young people the agency to consciously sculpt their ideal selves using materials, wisdom, and light bearers gathered from around the world.
I think where our perspectives perfectly converge, however, is on Zola's foundational requirement. Whether a student decides to delete every app on their phone tomorrow or master the digital landscape to build a global community, they absolutely cannot skip step one.
Step 1 being the internal work.
Yes,
Before they can successfully navigate the external world, they must sit quietly with themselves and answer that terrifying question: who am I, really?
I completely agree. The anchor of identity has to be forged offline. Zola makes a brilliant point when he says that if you don't know who you are, you will let the world price you according to its own convenience.
That is such a profound line.
It really is. If a student hasn't built that internal, offline foundation, they will eventually shrink themselves to fit whatever gets the most likes. They will become the exhausted performer who has lost the plot. But if they do the hard work of knowing themselves first, they can step onto any stage, physical or digital, without losing their soul.
Exploring Before I Go through these differing lenses reveals just how layered Zola's wisdom truly is. It reminds us that while the mediums change, from physical town squares to digital feeds, the fundamental human task remains identical.
Absolutely.
Zola's ultimate advice works regardless of the technology in your pocket. He tells the next generation, run your race, feel your feelings, put some value on yourself.
There is incredibly rich material in this manuscript that we haven't even touched on today, particularly his profound mechanics of grief and resilience. But for the student listening to this right now who is perhaps evaluating their own digital footprint, Zola's text offers a mirror that doesn't distort, flatter, or lie.
Which brings us right back to where we started. The next time you are staring at your phone, drafting that bio, or deciding whether to post that photo, when the glass goes black and you catch your own reflection in the quiet of your room, you have to ask yourself, are you looking at a character you created for the stage? Or are you finally looking at the person standing on it?